My name is Jack Weixel, and I head up a group called Dedicated Devices within the Android PA. And first off, I'd like to say thank you to BlueStar for inviting me here. This is a great opportunity for us. We don't get a lot of people think that Google is just this thing that lives on the web, a URL. There's not really people wandering around. I tend to be a curiosity sometimes when I come and talk at these things, but it's really, we don't often get a chance to actually talk about what we've done, particularly in enterprise. So thank you very much for the invitation, the opportunity. See if I can work the technology. The Google guy always screws up the technology, just so you know. Anytime I do these presentations. But what I work in is the group within Android that focuses specifically on enterprise capabilities. A lot of us know that Android started out as a consumer operating system. A lot of people I meet think of Google or Android specifically as consumer. But we've spent a lot of time, and I'd like to talk about that today, is what we're doing in terms of enterprise, why, and what that really means. And I'd like to start out, anytime you see a presentation from Google, it has to start with numbers, right? There's always numbers, analytics, all this type of capability we want to show, and I'm going to be no exception here. But I actually don't want to go through a lot of these. I think you're probably familiar. I just want to point out one specifically. It's at the very bottom here. 90% of IT decision makers think that mobility is absolutely critical moving forward for customer engagement, the performance of their industry. When I take a look at that number, I kind of think it actually means 10% of IT decision makers are going to be looking for a job in a couple of years. Not to be flippant about it and put it bluntly, but I think seriously, all joking aside, when we talk about by the way, I'm not sure, am I the wildebeest in that comparison? I've been caught a lot worse, just so you know. But I thought that was a really cool intro. Really, the migration is already started. I can go into detail as much as we want in terms of various segments and what we're seeing in terms of the adoption of Android across the board. But it is something that's already happening. And the preface, everything I'm about to talk about, when I talk about migration, talk about where we are, Google has a perception of being a very innovative company, and we do innovate a ton of stuff. But you also have to keep in mind that we actually take a lot of time to understand what are the trends happening in an industry. So one of the reasons I put up that number, all of these numbers here, is these are trends that are happening. What we do really well is to take a look at those trends and kind of figure out how can we innovate and help, given what we see customers already trying to do. So please keep that in mind as we walk through some of these slides. I want to ask a question to everybody before I go into this next piece. Do you remember what smartphone you had in 2006? Right, you didn't, unless you had one of the previous. The iPhone was introduced in 2007. My daughter doesn't know what life was like before a smartphone, right? She does everything on a smartphone. We, every day, probably do everything on a smartphone. That's how quickly things have progressed in this particular area. And there's a massive technology shift underway, and as you've seen with just the adoption of these types of technologies, the impact is faster than we've ever seen before. But as we take a look at this, understand how it might help ourselves, how we might help our customers, we really have to think about, we have to rethink the rule book a little bit. So what are some of those new rules? One, we've already covered a little bit about this earlier today. By the way, I tend to kind of wander around and wave my arms anyway, but I tell you what, when we walked down and did that tour, which was a really cool tour, by the way, I froze my butt off, and I'm still kind of shivering here. So I may do a little extra pacing as we go through here. I hope it's not too much of a distraction. But the point is, as we talked about earlier today, everything is connected. And we have to think about it from that standpoint in terms of creating solutions, whether that be in industry, whether that be in a public scenario, whatever it happens to be. The data that underpins or is collected through all of those activities and the insights we gain out of that, that's what's really important. We create an OS, our partners create various tools. What really matters at the end of the day is how we can use those to be able to deliver better experiences. And in that whole scheme of things, customer expectations will actually drive those business requirements and the solutions we need to deliver at the end of the day. And you know what? That's a good thing. Because anytime we look at a big shift like this, we're delivering different solutions that requires change. And if someone is already down that path of change, if we can take advantage of a technology that people are already using in the way they're already using it, the way they expect to use it, we're all better off. So that's one great thing about what's happening here today. But you know what? The road ahead is going to look a little bit different than it has in the past, and it always does. Every time we take a look at big shifts, along the way there was major change that we had to come to terms with. It's happening a lot faster now, and all of us are trying to react a little bit a little bit better, but it will be different. Now that difference, by the way, will be what types of products we deliver to customers, how we use those products, how we manage all of those products, how it all ties together. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit today is Android's new way forward. In light of all of this, what do we think of? Why are we doing certain things? And frankly, what have we done? Because it's opportunities like this when I actually get a chance to sit and explain in front of folks some of the enterprise capabilities that are built into the OS. I recognize that it's not as though all of you wake up in the morning, run to your computer and say, gee, what did Google do for me today, right? We all have things to do, or jobs to do, performance targets to meet. There's sometimes a disconnect between what we're doing to help support this and what you have to do on a daily basis. So I'd like to walk through a little bit of that. And number one is we're focusing, and I'll talk a little bit about why and how, on line of business applications when we take a look at the enterprise market. And there's a really simple reason for that, because that's mission critical to enterprises. If you take it in my focus in particular is a segment of that I'll get to in a second. But the point is, whether it's a large enterprise, a small enterprise, those applications, those projects that actually matter at the end of the day as to whether you're going to turn a profit, whether you're going to keep the doors open and so forth, that's what really counts. It's not necessarily, what type of phone you're going to use to be able to do something simple in a knowledge worker scenario, but something in this particular scenario really gets everyone's attention. So we've built old capability that you might have heard a few years ago called Android for Work. We sort of debranded. That's the first debranding effort I've ever been involved with, by the way. But we caused a lot of confusion with people thinking that this was a different version of Android. It's not. All the enterprise capabilities that we've built are just part of Android, but we're trying to address a situation that we didn't address initially, which led to a lot of fragmentation, a lot of issues within the industry. So a couple of the key points that I'll talk through really quickly before I get to some examples of what we're thinking of and how all this ties together is, number one, we want to create a consistent platform that people can innovate and differentiate on top of, but would allow customers to be able to choose devices that fit a particular business. They could be managed in a consistent fashion, regardless of what the software device happens to be, with the most powerful security you can possibly have built in. And I do want to spend a couple of slides because there's a bit of a misperception on Android as we go through this. And then on the back end of that, to be able to take advantage and leverage everything that we've built internally that works really well at Google to help you and your customers move forward. My focus is in something, as I call it, dedicated devices, which is not the smartphones and tablets we're used to, but it's things like rugged devices, single-use devices, kiosks, point-of-sale, signage, and eventually being able to get into some of the more innovative solutions that would be, different solutions. When we think of Android, I think of it anything that has a face, right? There's a touch screen. Some of the things we talked about earlier today also matter to enterprises that are in the same type of scheme of things. They don't have a touch screen. They're sensors. There are other types of tools. There are cameras. And so forth. When an enterprise looks at this, or any entity in terms of reaction, collecting data, being able to react and produce anything, we need to look at the entire scheme of things in the entire enterprise as opposed to just one particular device. So my area would be all of these types of devices, from rugged to kiosks. I'll talk a little bit about this, postage meter, as a matter of fact. And how these can be used in everyday life and tie everything together from a data perspective to produce better results. But before we get into that, does anybody here know Android for Work, I should ask? Oh, so wait, very good. But this is typical, right? I don't see every hand come up. There's maybe a few. What we did with Android, and again, like I said, I'll go through. I'd be happy to talk with anybody about technical detail. Later on, I don't want to spend the entire talk discussing that. But what we did with Android that used to be called Android for Work is to be able to create deployment methods, device management capability, and app management in a platform that just exists in every Android device. If you guys are familiar with MDMs or EMMs now as they're called, they used to be very proprietary ways to go and manage all of these devices, which create a lot of issues with customers in terms of complexity. Everything had to be managed a different way. You had to wrap apps for each and every device, so on and so forth. And also, by trying to do a proprietary way using the wrong APIs, you create security issues within Android itself. We wanted to get away from all of that. So we created this platform to be able to manage the products, be able to set them up and deploy them very simply, whether it's using a QR code, whether it's a hashtag to enroll in EMM. What we also did was create something called Zero Touch. And that's a capability for the device itself to be deployed to a customer, pulled out of a box, you sign into it, would that be with a particular password or a device ID, and the product and the device does everything for you. The EMM capability gets downloaded, we call it a DPC, Device Policy Control. It gets downloaded to the device, all the applications you need get downloaded to it, it's set up, it's managed, it's configured, everything over the air. And what actually happens is not only is it managed over the air, it requires the device to be managed. So you can try and provision this device without being connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form, and you could do that. But then the minute it connects, it's recognized as a zero-touch device, and there's a notification on the screen that says, gee, it's a zero-touch device. You have 30 minutes or whatever the time period happens to be is to reconfigure that, or we'll do it for you. The point being, you can enforce the capability, you can make it really easy, but someone also can't walk out the door with that device, wipe it, sell it on eBay, whatever it happens to be. So there's an enforcement as well as a security capability. The point to that is that that's all managed in the platform. You don't have to create something new to do that. You just take advantage of it and you create your value-added solutions on top of it. It's difficult to really describe the scale at Google to someone that's not been in the middle of it. I'll try and do that though with a couple of different slides here because these are important as we move forward to the security aspect. The most important being 2 billion. One of our metrics that you might have heard people talk about, but it's almost a religious thing at Google, is this thing called 30-day active. So over the past 30 days, what have people done with G Suite? What devices have been active and so forth. But we want to take a look on a typical day, on a typical month, over the last 30 days, what is X? And this 2 billion figure refers to the fact that any given day at this point in time, there are 2 billion Android devices being active. There's no other operating systems ever shipped 2 billion units. And that's what exists today on a daily basis. The reason that's important is we're collecting all kinds of data from each of those devices in terms of potential security flaws, apps, which we'll get to in a second here. 100 billion applications were actually delivered through the Play platform last year, 100 billion downloads, right? When we scan all of those apps, we scan apps that happen to be in the wild, and we do this with machine language. It's all AI. We'll talk about that in a second as we go. We can understand what impacts, what threats, what security problems there are in this ecosystem at machine speed to ensure a number of capabilities that and we tie that in with some other capabilities in the Play platform to ensure you have the most secure platform possible. In fact, I'll tell you right now, an Android device being managed via Play is the most secure mobile device you can possibly have, bar none. That includes, unless you take a device and it never touches anything in the network, you cannot get a more secure device, which has not necessarily always been the perception of Android, but we have statistics to back that up. It's not just security, it's the ability to distribute apps. Keep in mind that when we've got 2 billion apps, we have to build a platform so that you can download any app you want in any of those devices, it's going to work perfectly. That's what we build that you could leverage to deliver your apps to each of these devices. And what's key to that is when we think about the operating system is we release new versions of it. We're not releasing a brand new operating system, we're releasing new features to an operating system. So if you've built an app to be able to deliver on this Play infrastructure, if you upgrade a device, it will work. If you go to a new version, go from N to O or whatever the new version of Android happens to be, your app that you built will work. That's not always been the case, and it isn't the case if you build a proprietary version of AOSP Android. But all of this is also managed by managed play accounts, so that when you deliver an enterprise device, it is not a personal device. Google doesn't see what you're running on that particular device. We're not collecting information for advertising. It's an anonymous account that you can't sign in. There's no password. You can't tie other servers and so forth. It's simply a way for you to be able to manage the devices in your enterprise in a consistent fashion. So within each of these devices that we're delivering, there's all that powerful security, capability, and it bears out in terms of what the statistics are here that I'll show you. You guys might have heard of stage fright. That created lots of issues, last year, before that, Master Key. These are threats in the Android ecosystem. These are actually real numbers in terms of the difference between the hype and what was reality. So that simply, the most threatening of all was Master Key, in terms where there's 90, you probably saw the headlines, 99% of Android devices potentially could be affected. In fact, there were 0 threats actually observed in the market, even after we made the notification, explained the threats, and delivered the patch. Stage fright, same thing. The exploitation in terms of what was actually happened, as opposed to what was potential, was just ridiculously, it didn't exist. Here's a chart that shows the difference between using Play and if you sideload an app. Some people think that if I create my own version of the operating system, I sideload it, that's very secure. In fact, it's 20 times more likely to be hit with a vulnerability than if you use the Play infrastructure. So I just wanted to make a couple of points there, because these are key things I always get asked anytime I talk to a group, in terms of security, in terms of how we deliver, and what we're actually doing in enterprise versus consumer. And I'd like to then shift a little bit to talk about why we're doing this and how we see this fitting into the new world. On the heels of what we talked about earlier today, think of this from anything I'll talk about today. I'm going to use retail, and I'm going to use some commercial examples of that. But the concepts can be applied to anything. Whether it's smart city, smart enterprise, doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. So I want to start with a postage meter, simple postage meter that you have here. You guys from the States probably know Pitney Bowes. I don't know if everybody else understands who Pitney Bowes is, but they're in the US the biggest postage meter company in the country. They came to us a little while ago and said, you know what, we're going to release a new version of our postage meter, but we have this concept where we don't want to just deliver postage. What we want to do is have a marketplace, so that we can deliver other capabilities to small businesses. Maybe it's buying additional postage, maybe it's buying some type of advertising, could be a lot of other small business capabilities. What they wanted to do was build a web portal so that someone could come to this particular marketplace after they have a postage meter, be able to purchase any type of service, anything from accounting, as I said, to post additional postage, so forth, and then be able to take advantage of that with this machine that happens to be sitting in their office to put a stamp on a different package that you want to go ahead and deliver. So we worked with them to be able to take a 7-inch tablet, put it in this postage device, connect it to the internet, set up a web store so they'd be able to deliver all this to their company, and you wouldn't believe the reaction. The most important thing that, and they're selling thousands of these things, every month, with only a couple of months that they've taken to market. The reception has been huge. These are all capabilities that this is not a big company thing. These are small businesses that are innovating on the heels of a very simple device. And one of my favorite reactions to it was they did a little promotional video, and there was a young woman in a law office, and she was talking about the experience, and she said, it's just like using my phone. It was so simple because she's so used to using Android on her phone that that concept translated very well to this particular device. That's the kind of dynamic that we're interested in delivering. Another example is a company called Yumpingo. It's based in London, and if you walk into one of their restaurant partners, at the end of your meal, you're presented, again, maybe I need to be careful about which speaker I'm walking in front of so there's not too much feedback. But at the end of the meal, you're presented with a case that's got a little Android device, and we're using a lock task mode to go ahead and pin a particular app that allows the customer to go and rate what their experience has been. So, a chain of 4 or 5 little restaurants would be able to collect all of this data. They've found they get tremendous amount of response from customers, talking about anything from the service in the restaurant, particular meal choices, what they think about it. And what's important about that is a couple of different things, consumer face and internal. To the consumers, they can take this data and be able to present that in terms of results, in terms of what people think, how they rate, and so forth. Very, very similar to a lot of the web, and I'm blanking right now on the particular rating system on the web, where they might get tens of responses. Here they get thousands of responses, so they're able to use this in terms of rating so that other folks can take a look at this and determine whether they want to come to the restaurant. But more important, internally, they've got loads of data where they can say where a particular dish is working well at one location and hated somewhere else, or what's working really well in terms of service or other deliverables. The important thing is that it's all that data that's being collected through this experience that the company can actually utilize to understand what are trends, where the shortfalls are, how can they improve, and at the end of the day, the experience is upgraded and delivered in a much better format. A company called TravelTab takes these devices, and they're based in Florida, and if anybody's rented a car, you've seen they started out with a giant GPS device in the middle of a rental car so you can get around. This is actually a phone-sized product. It is a phone that's set up, again, in lock task mode so that there's a particular app that's running for this company that's all delivered and managed through this similar infrastructure. But the beautiful thing is, number one, you've got navigation. Number two, they've tied in some partnerships with various local vendors, whether it be a restaurant, gas station, whatever it happens to be. So there's advertising revenue that the company gets, as well as the user knows where they stop to get something to eat or other offers they might have. They make revenue off of not only any of the advertisements they sell. It's a phone service, so if you're, for example, if you're an American and you go to Canada, you've got a local phone that you make calls and you don't have high roaming charges. And of course they make revenue off of that. The customer experience is just all around better because you can walk out of the car with this device and again use navigation to be able to make phone calls, understand what are some offers in the local area. So they've had huge interest in this particular product and a lot of success. Tokyo Prime is a Japanese company that delivers services to taxi companies, where you've seen it probably in a taxi in any large city you've been to, where there's two sides to this. One is the driver's side, which is navigation, how to get around. There's content in the back of the device. In the case of Tokyo Prime, they've actually taken it a little bit further than some of the things that I've seen in New York and some other major cities, where there are advertisements and interactive advertisements that customers would be able to take advantage of certain offers, depending on where the location is, what the relationships are with these particular companies. And it's been huge for both the passengers to be able to take advantage of this as well as their partners alike, innovating on top of things that we use on a daily basis, but it's applied to a business scenario that works really well. So I made a point earlier about the Google infrastructure and what we've built. If you think about the fact of what we've done in search and delivering all the capabilities that you're used to from Google, all of this is an infrastructure built to scale in a massive format, in a massive way, that you could take advantage of to then build solutions similar to the ones I've talked about for your customers, whether that be large, whether it be small, regardless of whether that segment happens to be. And a lot of this involves AI at the end of the day, to be able to take advantage of doing things at machine speed to not only address customers' needs right now, but analyze what are the trends, make apply predictive analytics to be able to improve your bottom line as well as the customer experience. So what I want to walk through is, after giving some of those examples, talking about Google, knowing what you know about Google's services and back end, is how we could potentially take a look at this and tie it all together at the end of the day to produce results for your customers as well as yourself. And I'll use a scenario that's based on something I did a little while ago. Just full disclosure, I hate shopping. Right? I don't want to spend a lot of time in stores anywhere. All my shopping really gets done online. I'm like a retailer's worst nightmare. Right? I'll go online, I'll do my analysis. It takes me like forever to make a choice, which is probably a good thing going through online and doing it. But I don't really want to walk into a retailer unless I'm ready to buy something, or there's certain things that, regardless of the research I've done, I need to touch and feel. Right? So one of these examples was when I bought a television. So thinking about my experience, what I went through, what I actually did at the end of the day, let's use that as a scenario in terms of what I would like to do in terms of making my shopping experience a little bit more like what I do on online, and from the retailer's perspective, to be able to take that, what I like about online, and apply it to a customer experience to actually improve their bottom line. And it starts with being able to walk into a retailer and thinking about what I typically do is maybe I go through and I do an analysis of all these different televisions, and maybe I'm a loyalty member of Best Buy, or whatever the retailer happens. Best Buy is actually where I bought the TV from at the end of the day. Well, I could be online doing all my research, narrow down my choices as I did to several different televisions, and then I want to walk in the store to make a purchase decision. I want to see this television at the end of the day. Well, if I walk in and I'm a loyalty member, maybe the associate in the aisle already knows what I've been looking for. Number one, because I am a loyalty member. He can pull up my account. He can see what I've set aside in terms of what I want to take a look at, and then help me walk through. Number one, anybody walk into a store ever and you find out that you know a little bit more about what you're looking for than the sales guy, right? And that drives me nuts when that happens. I want a little bit extra information. At the very least, any salesperson could instantly become an expert, at least to my level, after doing research, so I have a decent experience, maybe even a better experience when I walk in. But I could be assisted, take a look at the television, make a choice, and right in the aisle, I can go ahead and pay for that. Right? I can place an order. I don't have to walk up front. I don't have to carry anything up front. I can even pay in the aisle because these devices could be a point-of-sale system. And what's happening, instead of having to pull something from the shelf, stick it in a little cart and take it up, it's being pulled from a shelf somewhere, because guess what? The warehouse is connected to the order that I'm making in the aisle. I make a payment, things get pulled, I can make a choice to walk outside, the order is ready for me. Maybe along the way, there are sensors that detect who I am, because I am a loyalty member and I've got an app on my device. By the time I walk up to the pickup counter, they know I'm walking up there, they know what my order is, it can be delivered to me, and I can take it in my car. Maybe I've bought a television that doesn't really fit in the car, so, because I get this little car, and I just want to have it shipped to the house. Great. I can go through that experience, I can see that television, do that last little bit I need to do to make a purchase. The store gets the order because I've walked in there, it'll be delivered to my house, all the convenience that I expect from an online shopping. There you go, fantastic experience. But things don't stop there. Because what's happened is the store's collected all this information about me. What are my likes? What are my choices? What I've already bought? What am I interested in going and picking up? A few weeks later, real experience, by the way, I don't know if you've had this experience with the large screen TV. Typically, those TVs don't have great sound systems, right? For some reason, the flat screen TVs, the sound just isn't quite as good, particularly dialogue. So I want to go back and I want to get a sound bar to make this a little bit better. I walk back into the store. Again, because of the data is available, because I am a loyalty member, the assistant can pull up information and suggest a particular device that goes well with that TV, or something that might be on sale, maybe even making an offer to me to make a purchase now before I walk out the door, and combine that whole experience together in terms of online to the actual experience. But you know what? And this also is me, right? I probably don't want to talk to a rep if I don't have to. Right? I'd rather walk up to a kiosk, I take my device, I tap it, and I get the same information. Because everything's connected, the system knows who I am, what I've purchased, and all of that can be applied for me to have a better experience. Store has better performance at the end of the day. But we take the same scenario, and maybe that conversation doesn't even start in the store. Maybe what we're actually doing is I'm going to do some kind of a remodel. I want to purchase a chair or a table, wherever it happens to be. So a design consultant comes out to the house, and we start to have the conversation in my living room. In this case, by the way, we can do the same type of browsing But it's probably my wife doing the browsing, and my job is just to basically say, yes, dear, to whatever she goes and decides. But the point being, we can go ahead and take a look at that. We can view all the options, we can see what matters, take it a step further, and instead of going out and taking a photo or a swatch if it's carpet or whatever it happens to be, we can use augmented reality to be able to use the device and understand exactly how that lamp's going to look in the corner, exactly how that chair or the sofa is going to look, in my living room. This is a partner of ours, iStaging. I don't know if you're familiar with it, that has software to do exactly this. So all of this can be done in my living room. And because everything, again, is connected, the consultant at that point in time can take a look and say, well, what is the inventory? What's available? What are the schedules? And place an order at the same time so that the order is set up, everything gets loaded in the truck, the drivers come in, the work crew on the appropriate day, be able to pick up the items from the warehouse, load for delivery, take it out to the house, everything's done. From my living room, in terms of concept to actually being delivered, all of it in a connected world, and again, all of it applying information in terms of my interests, my likes, what the experience has been, because at the end of the day, we're collecting all this data and analyzing what that experience has been. And from a customer's perspective, we can take a look and say, what are those purchase habits? What products are purchased together? How do we want to package things going forward? What's working, what's not? One example, I was talking to a company that diapers or nappies? What is you refer nappies or diapers? Sorry? Nappies? Okay. Well, this is a pretty good store. They found that there was an interesting correlation between beer and nappies that they were selling. I'm not sure what that is, by the way, but they recognized that for some reason there was a high percentage of people buying beer and nappies. They made a change to their layout in terms of where these products were and saw a resulting increase in sales of each. So just understanding purchase habits, what's happening, allows you to make choices from shelf placements, end caps, products being delivered together. All of this can, customers happier, the store's happier at the end of the day. Now, that's a customer experience, but also take a look at the fleet management. What's happening with in a delivery scenario? What's happening in terms of maintenance? How does that relate to a particular driver, a particular route, a particular set of trucks or whatever it happens to be you purchased? How can all of this be adjusted to make performance better? By looking at this in a connected fashion, analyzing all that information, and really looking at the data, which is key to all of this, you can make better decisions to improve your customers' experience as well as your bottom line. So hopefully, this gives you some ideas in terms of what we're looking for. I'd be glad to explore some of these topics further. But if you want to learn more about what we've done, if you go to android.com/enterprise, you'll be able to walk through and receive links to more in-depth technical discussions than we've covered here today. And if you go to enterprise.google.com/android/experience, you can even try out without having to have an EMM, without having to have a lot of technology, just to understand what this experience is. As you contemplate how that might work with your particular customers. And if you're interested in developing something that delivers all of these technologies, you can go to developer.android.com/work. And I think we're going to make this presentation available so you don't have to, if you take pictures of it, that's great. That's the easiest way to take notes these days. But you also have all of these links to be able to follow up on it. But I encourage you to take a look at what we've done. I'd love to hear from you guys in terms of how some of this might apply to your experience. And I'll tell you what, between some of the rugged partners over the last couple of years, we've made great strides in terms of understanding, because we need to talk to folks like you to understand how we can change Android in our platforms to make it more relevant to what you're trying to do. So we welcome any of that input as we go forward, and there's cool things that we can collaborate on. So I really appreciate the time.